Well, Iranian state media is reporting that Tehran has sent its response to a US proposal to end the war. But the details of that response, delivered via mediators in Pakistan, were not immediately known. US President Donald Trump later posted on Truth Social saying Iran would be, quote, laughing no longer. Meanwhile, an Iranian military spokesman warned it could use surprising new methods of retaliation if the country is attacked again. Recent days have seen flare-ups in fighting in and around the Strait of Hormuz, despite a ceasefire being in place. On Sunday, a drone sent a small fire on a ship off the coast of Qatar, while the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait reported separate drones entering their airspaces. Sina Asodi is a Middle East expert at George Washington University in the US. Great to see you. Details of what's in the Iranian counter-proposal haven't been released. Do we have any inkling of anything slightly new that Tehran is offering the Americans at this point?
We don't have the information, but some of the proposals that have previously been discussed involve a zero stockpile in Iran, zero stockpile of fissile material in Iran, a moratorium of uranium enrichment. Now, the American side had offered 20 years, the Iranian side had offered 5 years. I think somewhere in between could potentially be on the table. But what I think Iranians and Americans have been really discussing is a one-page understanding or memorandum of understanding that first ends the war, lifts the double blockade that the Iranians and the Americans have imposed, and then an agreement to restart nuclear talks, which require more technical discussions between the Iranian and the American side. So I think the focus right now is a political understanding to end the conflict for good.
Right, so if they've got their differences down, just roughly speaking, to one page worth, should we be encouraged that it's got to this point?
Well, I don't think so. I think that this is the method that President Trump prefers. He is not interested in technical details. I mean, when you compare this one-page memorandum with Iran or the North Korean understanding in Trump V1 with JCPOA, which was 150-page of document technical details, you see the difference. But I think the fact of the matter is that the Iranian side and the American side have a vested interest in ending the conflict. And the fact that Pakistanis and seemingly the Qataris are now helping to end the conflict, I think is a positive sign.
Right. There's a big summit coming up between US President Trump and China's Xi Jinping. It's on the horizon. What chance there is an agreement between the US and Iran before then, or how important is it that there is agreement before that takes place?
I think it's quite likely because when the president goes there on May 14th, he wants to go there with the ability to claim that he won the Iran war. He might also be interested in giving the Chinese an opportunity to intervene and persuade Iranians to take a deal with the United States. And he has said actually that he would discuss the Iran war with President Xi of China. So I think it's quite likely.
Iran responded to Washington's peace proposal while warning it would not hold back from retaliating against any new US strikes or permit foreign warships through the Strait of Hormuz. Is that just more tough talking by the Iranians, or do you get the feeling that Tehran really feel that it maintains a strong negotiating position?
I think that both the Americans and the Iranians think that they have a very strong negotiation position, that they have all the bargaining chips. If you pay attention to what President Trump has said, that the U.S. holds all the winning cards, you can see how he thinks. From the Iranian side, they also think that they're coming to the negotiation table, having won the war by surviving the United States and Israel's joint strikes. And also their ability to squeeze the world economy by blockading the Strait of Hormuz. So I think each side thinks that they just won the war, and I think this is a quite dangerous situation because they both feel that they have a less need to show flexibility or to give concessions during the talks.
Right, given that, what would we need to see happening, do you think, before we can say the end of the Iran war is really in sight? What is the single most important piece of the puzzle that needs to fall into place at this point?
I think there are two issues here. One is political, and that when I say political, I'm referring to the double blockade. Iranians have blockaded the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States have blockaded a little further, preventing ships from going to or coming from Iranian ports. That's a political problem that needs to be solved very soon. And second, I think there's a technical issue here, and that's the principle of enrichment in Iran. I think that once these two issues are resolved, I think we can have a deal, but I can say with certainty that Iranians will not give up on the principle of enrichment on their soil, although they're quite flexible in terms of agreeing to a suspension of uranium enrichment or international verification.
Sin Azodi from George Washington University in the US. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Samuel Ramani is an expert in security issues with the Royal United Services Institute in London. Good to see you. We don't know exactly what's in the Iranian proposal, but what do you think the US needs to hear in order for it to come to an agreement with Tehran at this point?
Well, you're right. I mean, there's not enough details about the Iranian proposal, but what I suspect that it probably includes is a broad, far-reaching ending of hostilities. So that doesn't just include the U.S. and Iran. It also includes Israel's campaign in Lebanon, which it sees as inextricably linked to broader peace. It would also basically be calling for reopening of the Strait of Hormuz completely in exchange for sanctions relief. And maybe they might offer some security guarantees against future U.S. and Israeli attacks, and alternatively, they might offer security guarantees to not attack the Gulf countries in exchange. What the Americans would probably want is obviously a renunciation of nuclear weapons, a reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, an end of attacks on regional countries, especially oil facilities, and also a reopening of a robust inspections regime involving the IAEA. And they would not want to make concessions on sanctions or on any other of Iran's demands unless they see all those things up front. So that difference between Iran wanting the sanctions to be lifted and some carrots along with the enforcement and the U.S. resisting that is probably what's going to make this deal hard to get over the line.
So tracking our results so far, Samuel, has either side shown any willingness to change their position? Any concessions much since the beginning of negotiations?
Well, I mean, I think that there's obviously been some pragmatism around the edges, but the core positions remain very strongly opposed to each other, as I just noted. So obviously, the Americans started off Operation Epic Fury with an aim of regime change in Iran. They're now acknowledging, of course, that the Islamic Republic is going to stay in power. They're basically restricting some of their, more coercive airstrikes and naval blockade measures to assist the talks. So the U.S. has shown some compromises from the most maximalist objectives. The Iranians also have basically expressed open to some enrichment freezings and moratoriums and the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz in a conditional way. So they aren't going for a total war against the U.S. and its partners in the Gulf. But in general, I mean, these compromises are marginal. They don't address really the core issues. And I think that we're going to be seeing, even if not a return to all-out war, a period of prolonged gray zone tension where there is tit-for-tat attacks and instability in the Gulf region for months to come, or maybe even years.
While this is happening, Samuel, Trump is preparing a major visit to Beijing to meet China's President Xi Jinping. The US president wants to secure a big economic deal with Xi. Can you see a world where Trump makes concessions to the Iranians so he goes to China in a stronger negotiating position on that front?
Well, I mean, it was very clear that the Chinese canceled Trump's visit in the first place, or the visit didn't go ahead, in part because of the fact that otherwise, they would have had to have ended the war with Iran. So the war with Iran was obviously something that was very frustrating to China. China has managed to weather the storm from the energy side of things quite effectively because of the storage from their own reserves, but they remain heavily dependent on the stability of Middle Eastern oil supply chains as well as also favorable U.S. policies on Russian oil and Russian sanctions. So they've gotten some good news from Trump with regards to the waivers on Russian energy. They haven't gotten so much good news on Trump's approach towards the Middle East. So I think it's definitely possible that a deal with Iran could be brought over the line in order to create goodwill with China. But there's also a tendency in American policy to overestimate the degree to which China can actually exert leverage over Iran. I remember when I was engaging with American officials in 2024 during the height of the maritime security crisis, there were a lot of American officials who said, "Oh, China can just talk to the Iranians and the Houthis will end their strikes." The level of depth of the China-Iran partnership is often overstated in the United States. So I don't know how much a deal will actually be effective if there's still tensions over other issues, including Taiwan, semiconductors, and global trade.
An expert in security issues with the Royal United Services Institute in London, Samuel Ramani. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, just before the show, I spoke to journalist and Middle East analyst Gordon Robison and asked about his response now that Iranian state media is saying Tehran has sent a message to the United States.
Well, assuming for the sake of argument that is an accurate description, and with any diplomatic communication, what countries say publicly is not necessarily what they say privately. But starting from that point, it feels like we are exactly where we've been for the last 6 weeks. The United States and Iran are fundamentally talking about different things. The United States wants to talk about the nuclear issue and it wants to reopen the strait. The Iranians want to talk about cessation of hostilities, by which they mean not only the bombing of their country, but also the Israeli war in Lebanon. Maybe there is something constructive in this. It's always possible that behind the scenes there is activity that we don't see public. I guess we all just have to hope so.
Do you think this will be enough for US President Donald Trump?
It might be. Trump keeps focusing publicly on the nuclear issue, but the economic damage from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz is beginning to bite. Less so in the U.S. than in other parts of the world. But Trump and the people around him know it's going to impact the U.S. sooner rather than later, especially as we move into the summer when Americans tend to drive a lot traditionally. So it feels to me like both sides are looking for a way out of this. The problem is finding a way out that saves face on both sides. And, frankly, that's been the problem almost since day one.
Could you remind us what the sticking points have been for Iran and the US and how much room there is for both sides to maneuver?
So the sticking point for the U.S. is the nuclear program, which the United States, I should remind people, claimed a year ago to have completely obliterated, but then went in at the end of February and started this war claiming it needed to destroy it. Now, most reports are that the Iranian stock of highly enriched uranium is now largely buried under a mountain. So even if the Iranians were willing to give it up, even if they were willing to let it be secured by some sort of international force, by all accounts, it would be an enormous logistical effort just to do that. And whether the Iranians are willing to let foreigners in to help with or manage that, I think is very, very open to debate. From the Iranian perspective, they want the Israelis to stop bombing them and to stop bombing Iran's clients in Lebanon, Hezbollah. It also wants the United States to lift its longstanding sanctions on Iran. And obviously, they want the more recent U.S. blockade of Iranian ports around the strait lifted. So there are a lot of moving parts here. And again, it's very difficult to see how the two sides can find something that allows them both essentially to claim victory, but it's not impossible.
Now, Qatar's Prime Minister reportedly told Iran's Foreign Minister that using the Strait of Hormuz as a pressure tool would only deepen the crisis. How likely is it for Tehran to give up on using the waterway as part of their strategy?
Well, I think partly it depends on how you frame it. If one says that they're giving up on using the waterway, the Iranians would regard that as a loss of face and wouldn't go for that. On the other hand, the Qataris do have some leverage here. They have maintained fairly good relations with Iran. The largest natural gas field in the world is shared half and half by the Iranians and the Qataris. So the Qataris are in a good position not to tell the Iranians to give up, and the language does matter here, not to tell the Iranians to give up, but to tell the Iranians that ultimately it's in their interest as well as the interest of the Arab countries on the other side of the Gulf to allow transit through the Strait on something approximating normal rules. Now, whether that can happen remains to be seen. A big question mark in all of this is that the Iranians, in charging tolls in the Strait, which violates all sorts of international law, but on the other hand, it's hard to stop them from doing so. That is netting them a great deal of revenue, even now with very few vessels passing through the strait. So the Iranians won't want to give up that revenue, and that brings us back to the question of sanctions relief. If the Iranians can get broader sanctions on their economy lifted, then they will have less reason to try to charge tolls on ships passing through the straits.
Now, Gordon, this is all happening just days before US President Trump meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping. How much influence does Beijing have on Tehran?
It's very hard to say because you're talking about two very closed societies, but China is one of the largest customers for Iran's oil and its petrochemical products. And China is one of the few countries that can kind of safely ignore U.S. sanctions on Iran. So I think it's fair to say the Chinese do have quite a bit of influence. And obviously, the U.S. relationship with Beijing is important to the United States as well. So if the Chinese indicate to the Americans that they are extremely unhappy at oil headed in their direction being choked off, that doesn't necessarily mean that President Trump will give them what they want, but he is likely to at least listen to their arguments.
All right, we're going to leave it there, but great to get your insights, Gordon Robison, journalist and analyst, joining us today from Berlin. Thanks so much.
Always a pleasure.